Poland has been an occupied country time and time again. Insurgency flows through its people's veins. But even before Poland lost its independence in 1795, its people have held an enduring identity that kept Poland on the map to current day. This identity has carried it through the hardest of times. At the outbreak of the world's most terrible war, Polish identity stood strong despite the country being the first wartime casualty of the Nazi regime. It was this identity that helped Warsaw withstand Hitler's army for over 66 days before finally falling. And it was for this identity that Poland fought back even after the country was occupied by the German war machine. During World War II, Poles found themselves fighting an underground war against Germany, from Polish airmen who flew with the British RAF to freedom fighters sabotaging German trains in the fatherland. Poland found new ways and weapons to fight back with. It was during this time of heroism and sacrifice that the Polish people used one of modern man's most effective weapons to date: information. The Polish underground press and radio were feared by the Germans, and rightly so. Underground media revolutionized the revolution. Civilian Poles forced into occupation had a way to keep Polish identity alive. They also had a way for the Home Army to organize and fight back. It was the underground radio and press that led to one of Poland's bravest moments, the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. Piorem I Mieczem, with pen and sword, Polish underground media and the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. Long before the uprising of 44, as Germany was first tightening its grip on the Polish population, the Nazi regime made institutional changes in an effort to fragment and cripple the dissemination of Polish information. The Germans banned most Polish cultural institutions. Educational institutions other than elementary and trade schools were prohibited. Theaters, radio stations, libraries, museums, scientific institutions, journals, and publishing firms were boarded up. The media was silenced to make sure Poland couldn't communicate amongst its population, nor reach other forces for help. And in an effort to literally silence the country, the Polish language itself was outlawed as the land was incorporated into the Reich. These acts sowed the seeds for underground action. As soon as the Germans occupied Poland, they had seized bookstores, libraries, and printing presses. Banned books were listed and summarily liquidated. However, underground presses found ways around the bans by disguising new books as ordinary gardening or cooking books. They preserved cultural plays and poetry by republishing it illegally. But most importantly, the press was used as an organ for underground groups such as the Armia Krajowa, or the Home Army, where its main purpose was to keep morale up and update the people. After the First Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and the German Retribution, these papers still circulated even after the city was leveled down to the last stone. In addition to papers, underground radio also helped keep the civilians of Warsaw informed. They helped people survive. They helped people keep hope. They helped people prepare for when the moment came to fight back. And on April 29th, 1944, at 8:15 in the morning, that moment finally came.
No doubt Warsaw already hears the guns of the battle, which is soon to bring her liberation. Those who have never bowed their heads to the Hitlerite power will again, as in 1939, join battle with the Germans, this time for decisive action. The Polish army, now entering Polish territory, trained in the Soviet Union, is now joined to the People's Army to form the core of the Polish Armed Forces, the armed wing of our nation in its struggle for independence. Its ranks will be joined tomorrow by the Sons of Warsaw. They will all together with the Allied army pursue the enemy westwards, wipe out the Hitlerite vermin from Polish land, and strike a mortal blow at the beast of Prussian imperialism. For Warsaw, which did not yield but fought on, the hour of action has already arrived.
These were the words that Moscow sent out to Poland. It told the Poles to start an uprising, and that Russian soldiers were on their way to help them out. In as little time as 9 hours, the streets of Warsaw would be filled with gunfire and people dying, and the promised help would never arrive. Despite the German occupation utterly destroying the publishing industry in Poland, newspapers in circulation started flourishing once more, only this time they had to be kept secret. Because the invasion splintered the country's population by limiting contact, in every town and city you could find small resistance groups. Each of these groups tried to gain legitimacy by producing their own publications. Added to the official military and political publications, the number of papers and journals boomed. Information flowed once more. Updates were made available on the war efforts and world politics. Propaganda, humor, and scientific works were published. The Polish officials used papers such as this to issue orders and proclamations and even announced the death sentences of traitors. One of the most famous papers was called Bulletin Informacyjny, or the Informational Bulletin. Its first edition was published on the 5th of November in 1939. Eventually, it became the organ of the Home Army and ran weekly. At its peak, the Informational Bulletin had the largest circulation, with several runs of up to 47,000 copies by 1943, and a total of 317 issues. The paper's astonishing unbroken run was made possible by the efforts of the Home Army's Bureau of Information and Propaganda. The Bureau was also responsible for many other publications, including papers that spread disinformation among German ranks, such as Der Soldat and Der Klaubtermann. On the first days of fighting, the Informational Bulletin was openly distributed by paperboys and on-foot couriers. Most of these couriers acted under enemy fire and cleverly used the Warsaw sewer systems to reach different parts of the city. The issue that day had strict orders sent out to fighters by the civilian commissioner.
All the dead, both German and Polish, are to be given temporary burial and all personal documents removed. All self-appointed courts are banned. All enemies of the Polish nation, German and Volksdeutsche, are to be protected pending a trial. All property belonging to German citizens or the German state is to be guarded and inventoried.
It was the first of many such decrees that the Home Army would send out to the Warsavians, and though the papers primarily focused on issues of day-to-day fighting, there were several instances of the unusual. The bulletin once wrote that the freedom fighters were joined by a group of 5 Wehrmacht fighters who deserted because of their Polish lineage, as well as 2 ex-Soviet fighters. In an even stranger news, the Informational Bulletin wrote a feature on a deaf and dumb platoon of 21 boys and 2 girls who were led by an officer named Yo-Yo. Predominant, however, was the poetry that not only kept spirits up, but also reflected the devastation of the Polish nation. Many poets rose up to give a voice to Warsaw.
O Lord of the apocalypse, Lord of the world's end, put a voice in our mouths and punishment in our hand.
Poetry was circulated in the papers or handwritten and passed along. By October, the Informational Bulletin included academic papers regarding the events of the uprising, and even criticizing the Russian advance from the east as too passive. However, wartime sometimes got the best of the underground press. Some publishers felt the pressure to create sensational headlines. An Information and Propaganda Bureau report criticized headlines such as "Polytechnic is ours," when it was known that the building was lost, or that Poniatowski Bridge is in our hands, while tanks rolled down the adjacent roads, firing on Home Army districts. Rather than increasing morale, sensationalism diminished it. Noting the effect it had on the population, General Tadeusz Burr-Komorowski of the Home Army issued a statement to the Informational Bulletin.
You may only write what is factually true, as each reader is quite capable at any time of checking the accuracy of the Informational Bulletin and losing faith in it. I forbid the printing of such rubbish.
The uprising, which was supposed to have been short and swift, instead dragged on. Because of this, many Poles soon ignored official propaganda. By midway through August, papers were distributed just as much as before. However, only the radio news was read. The citizens of Warsaw began seeking hard facts. They also found the papers lacking external information on the outside world. The underground radio stations of Warsaw would be responsible for making available the rest of the information the presses didn't have. While the papers covered many things, the greatest feat of the Polish underground was the operation of 2 radio stations, Błyskawica, or Radio Lightning, and Polskie Radio, or Polish Radio. While Lightning was the military station, Polish Radio was aimed at civilians. Both stations were responsible for breaking the bubble of the occupation and sending out messages to the rest of the world, appealing for help, and both were a thorn in the side of the German occupation. Before the uprising, the Germans seized the Politechnika Warszawska, or Warsaw Polytechnic. The move effectively cut off any hopes of a Warsaw radio station. All the equipment was housed there, so a new radio station was smuggled in, piece by piece, from Częstochowa, some 200 kilometers southwest of Warsaw, just days before the uprising started. Antoni Zambik, one of the broadcasters, oversaw its construction, which involved repairing many parts damaged by humidity. Simply by having any of these parts in their possession, all who helped create Radio Lightning faced immediate death. It took over a week to repair, but finally, on August 8th, just after 10 in the morning, Radio Lightning started broadcasting for the first time. With the transmitter hidden in a false chimney, the first word on air were spoken by Zbigniew Szczękowski.
Hello, here is Błyskawica. A radio transmitter of the Home Army in Warsaw on 32.8 and 52.1 meter bands. The spirit of Warsaw is wonderful. The women of Warsaw are wonderful. They are everywhere, in the front line, together with soldiers as nurses or liaison officers. Even children are animated by a wonderful spirit of bravery. We greet all freedom-loving people of the world.
And that was Radio Lightning's first mission, to reach the outside world with its signal. But the team of Polish and English broadcasters had the odds stacked against them. The signal was only 100 watts, so they had to hope that BBC's most powerful receivers would pick it up. By the end of the week, the team started to lose hope, but they went on. It wasn't until August 15th that Radio Lightning received an echo from Britain. Knowing that they weren't just talking into an empty void, the broadcasting team renewed their efforts. To help get the message to as many people as possible, Polish officials asked those who owned radios to position them in places where the most people could hear them. The average lineup consisted of a communique from the Department of Information and programs specifically for soldiers and civilians. Thanks to Radio Lightning, the first Allied supply drops by the RAF were made known in advance. Even the Allied conferences that took place across the ocean were covered in great detail. At one point, a megaphone service was created and operated by military patrols in the center of the city. These same patrols would act much like reporters, encouraged to talk to the people they encountered to gather opinions and concerns that would be addressed in the next broadcast. Because of the influence the radio station had in the city, the Germans were working feverishly to find it. At one point, German planes bombed buildings on the suspicion that it may house Radio Lightning. They did hit their mark one day. A 1,500-pound bomb fell through the station's roof. However, it continued down through the building, floor by floor, until it landed in the cellar without exploding. With little success in destroying the station, the Germans attempted to blot out its broadcasts with their own. They aired a signal on the same frequency as Radio Lightning and used it to spread disinformation and false orders. However, despite all the challenges it faced, Radio Lightning stayed on air until the very last day. Radio Lightning made its last broadcast on October 4th, 1944. The uprising had been crushed only 2 days earlier. The last issue of the Informational Bulletin, number 102, was also published. In it, the words that every Pole feared to read.
The battle is finished. From the blood that has been shed, from the common toil and misery, from the pains of our bodies and souls, a new Poland will arise, free, strong, and great.
The evacuation was well underway. On October 5th, it had been 66 days since the fighting first started, and Poland was not free. But the war for a free Europe was far from over.